What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's Pastor Keenan, and I got my sidekick Nick back with me for another episode of the Everyday Christian. Nick, how you living, bro?
A little bit better with this little screaming goat toy over here.
I don't know if
there you go. Yeah, right. It's like the batteries are dying.
It's almost anticlimactic, man.
I know. Like I was expecting some like loud scream. But I pressed this like.
Yeah, well, I think you actually had your thumb over the little noise thing on the bottom. So watch this one more time. Screaming goat.
I can hear it.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it could be the fact of that, that again, it's probably 5 years old and the batteries are dying. So all good things must come to an end, right? But hey, not the Everyday Christian, man. We're just knocking out episode after episode after episode. If you want to, you can go ahead and download this podcast. It's called the Everyday Christian. It's across Spotify. It's across Apple Music. It's across, Nick, what else we got, man?
Yeah, it's on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio Podcast, Podbean. Apparently, it's kind of scattered out there.
Yeah, I was going to say we're coming from a lot of different areas and avenues, man. You can always check us out too at www.fruitionchurchky.org. That's where all of it goes down at. That's where Nick puts all of the pictures and all of the posts and all the events that's going on. So there's so much that's happening inside of the church. It takes me about 10 minutes to do the announcements on Sundays now because we got so much going on. But again, if you want to check us out, there's just a couple of ways. You can go to Facebook, just search Fruition Church. You can do that as well. So there's a ton of different things that we got going on, and we'd love for you guys to get involved. But Sunday service, man, Nick, I tell you what, I feel like it's probably, and I know it's only June, but I feel like it's probably the best sermon of the year. I don't even know if there's going to be another sermon after it this year that will be as good as what that one was. I don't know, man. It's pretty up there. What do you think?
It's definitely it was definitely a sermon for the times that we're in. I think
Absolutely,
the best way to say that, but. Yeah, I think it's definitely a huge. There's a lot of information, a lot of points, a lot of reveals from the Holy Spirit. That were very pertinent to the times that we've been living in over the last couple of years.
Yeah, all them old school people, man, they would say it was an on time word. You know what I mean? It was an on time word. But the title from Sunday's sermon was Conversations, and I felt this in my spirit, man. And Nick, I'm telling you, I read and I read and I read and I read and I read. And then it was finally over in Joshua 22. Like I read 10 chapters, man, to get to this sermon that came up. But I can tell you, like it started bubbling inside of me even before I made it to the scripture about just this whole conversations, opinions. Of course, everybody's fighting back and forth and posting different stuff. And like you said, it's the times that we live in now. But I just want to read this scripture, and we want to talk to you today, whenever you listen to this, about having conversations with people, about bridging the gap, about talking to people about their feelings, their emotions, what they're going through. It's not just enough to throw a cliche Bible verse at somebody, Nick. It's not just enough just to say, I'm praying for you, and leave it at that, man. Like, if we're going to be Christians today, and we're going to grow the church, and we're going to bring people to heaven with us, man, then we have to get involved. We have to get involved with people. We have to listen to people. We have to have conversations with people. And it starts over in Joshua chapter 22. Listen to this. It's just 2 short verses, but we got a lot of info to throw in. It says, "But that's not it. We did it because we cared. We were anxious, lest someday your children should say to our children, 'You're not connected with God, the God of Israel. God made the Jordan a boundary between us and you. You Reubenites and Gadites have no part in God. And then your children might cause our children to quit worshiping God.'" Now that is a very scary sentence, ladies and gentlemen. I want to read that one more time. "And then your children might cause our children to quit worshiping God." Now, to put this into a preface real quick, the Israelites had went on a winning streak. 31 victories, 31 kings, 31 nations had they conquered, taken land, taken livestock, taken money, Nick, taken gold, all the treasures. They had taken everything, man, and they were at a point and a time where they were divvying up land. They were giving possessions to the different tribes of Israel. Now, the thing about it is that the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had claimed land over on the other side of the Jordan before they had crossed into the Promised Land. That's the land that Moses and God had given them. And so they had made this plan, put it together, and said, you know what? Joshua looked at them and said, you need to go inherit the land that we had given you on the other side of the Jordan. Everybody was cool with it. Everybody was cool with the plan. What happens is that whenever they get to the other side, they build an altar. They don't build an altar, Nick, because they want to. They don't build an altar because they need to. They build an altar out of anxiousness. I don't think they messed up here. I talked about this on Sunday, Nick, about how when they probably did the right thing. Whenever you get anxious, the first thing you should do is build an altar and pray and worship. Build an altar and thank God. Build an altar, get your mind back right. But they built an altar because they were anxious. Why were they anxious for? They were anxious because you have the people of Israel living on one side of the Jordan in the quote-unquote promised land, in the land that God had given them, the land flowing with milk and honey, but yet they were on the other side of the Jordan. They were on the side that didn't look as holy. It didn't look as promising. They're on the other side, and their anxiousness began by thinking somewhere along the way that they might be excommunicated from the Israelites. Not this generation, but the next generation would be excommunicated because, you know what? Well, you don't live, you're not a part of, you're not in the same territory, so therefore God can't be working in you like he's working in us. So
that doesn't speak to modern Christianity.
Right, exactly, man. And so they get anxious and they build this altar, Nick. And let's talk just for a second before we go jumping into too much right here about that whole building an altar when you're anxious. Building an altar not only for that, but to help connect generation after generation after generation. I mean, they said it in the word right here. We're not building this altar as a to make sacrifices on or do. We're building this altar as a connection for the next generation. Talk about that.
Yeah,
man.
I mean, it was just, clearly just to show, I wouldn't say clearly because people misinterpreted it, but
absolutely.
We'll
talk about that too.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but, I think it was a sign of remembrance that, the same God that saved them is the same God who saved us. It's just like a pillar in their community to be like, we both worship on both sides of the Jordan here. We're both worshiping the same God. We're both coming to the same God when we're anxious. We're both coming to the same God when we're scared. I think that was just a huge point that they were trying to make and try to get to come across, but of course we're going to find out that's not what a lot of half the other Israelites kind of thought there.
Exactly, yeah, man. And so they built this altar. They do it out of anxiousness, but they do it out of remembrance as well. And the thing about it is that the Israelites over on the other side of the Jordan look over towards the other side, and they see this altar. And the first thing they do is flip completely out. They have a meeting with all of the elders inside of the camp, and they plan on going to war. They plan on going to war, Nick. These are their people. These are the same people that had been in battle with them, that had defeated kings with them, that had taken land with them, that had seen God do miracles. These are the same people, and now they are deciding to go to war. Let's get some people together and let's go have a conversation with these people, because obviously they're building an altar and not for the right reasons. They're building, listen, the Israelites started making assumptions. And to me, assuming about a person is a lazy way to write them off. Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. What's that old phrase, like when you assume you make a you-know-what out of you and me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's the truth, man. And I think, honestly, man, as Christians, we become lazy We don't want to interject. We don't want to talk to people. We don't want to hear people's stories. We don't want to get to the bottom of it. Let's just assume. Let's assume they act like this because. Let's assume they're doing this because. And whenever we assume, it's like, oh, well, I've made up their story for them, so now I don't have to fool with them. And whenever we do that, we are not bridging gaps. We're not having conversations. We're not learning about people. We're building walls. And not church walls, not for bigger churches to bring people in. We're building walls to keep sinners out of our perfect grace area that God loves us with every Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing again that we do as modern Christians. Like we look at one person and we start making those assumptions about them. They have tattoos; they can't be a good person.
Always go to tattoos, bro.
Throw it in there, but
okay, go ahead.
It's the easiest thing. It's right in front of me.
That's true.
But we make that we make that assumption though. Whether that's with we look at a group of bikers and immediately we're like, oh God, they can't be good people. They're terrifying, scary people that are going to cuss and scream and do horrible things. But how many bikers out there are fighting for children more than Christians are in church right now?
Right, absolutely,
it's crazy.
Man. Yeah.
We look at different people and we make assumptions about them. We look at one denomination and make assumptions about them. It's crazy that we do that still today. This was years and years and years and thousands of years ago.
Right.
But we're still sitting here falling to the same stuff over and over and over again. We're not learning from our past. We're not reading the Bible the way we're supposed to be reading it. We're not, looking back and saying, okay, they did this, so, that means we shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Instead, we're sitting here, judging Christians back and forth and, all this sort of stuff. I'd say, right now in, June of 2022, all we're doing right now is fighting with each other back
Absolutely.
and forth over these certain issues.
Right.
So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, man. They literally look at this altar and they're like, they obviously did not build this for the right reasons, and so they get people together, man, and they're going to go to war. They're just going to take care of the situation. They were afraid. Listen, they had become so holy. They have become so righteous that they were afraid that they were going to bring the judgment of God on them. Well, we can't have that, so we can't have that. So we're going to go eliminate the problem. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's what assuming does. Assuming is literally, again, writing it off. If it doesn't look like the way I do it, if it doesn't seem like the way I do it, if it's not the same Bible that I read, if it's not the same time I go to church, if it's not the same music that I play, then it's not right. It's not right. And I don't want you bringing that judgment up in my house. I don't bring the wrath of God. Sometimes, man, I feel like that's the whole situation with churches today. That's the reason why you have so many interdenominational revivals. Well, disputes, but quote unquote revivals is because, I can have a seven Baptist church revival and bring in a Baptist preacher and know what he's going to preach. Mm-hmm. I don't have to worry about it. I can have 7 Methodist church revival. I can pick the denomination, Pentecostal, it doesn't matter. But as long as you have the same mindset coming in and preaching the same word to the same people, then you know what? You're always going to have that same outcome. No matter what, what I'm saying? But it's whenever we actually have to get outside of those lines and go, you know what? Oh my God, people are still getting to heaven regardless of the denomination that's tied to their name. It's insane.
We're so afraid of contamination.
I know, right?
I don't want those Baptist ideals in my Methodist church.
Right.
It's just crazy. We're Christians.
Yeah.
We're Christians. We're all going to go to, I wouldn't say we're all going to go to heaven, but as Christian, if we're a born again believer of Christ and we have accepted him into our heart and we have a relationship with him, we're all going to go to the same heaven one day.
Absolutely.
And I think you mentioned it Sunday, I think God has a big enough sense of humor to put you right next to the person that you would judge the most when you're on earth.
Right.
I'm not going to talk to that Methodist guy over there. I don't believe what I believe. He doesn't believe what I believe. I don't believe what he believes. And then when you get up to heaven, by your mansions, God's going to put your house right next to that Methodist guy.
Absolutely.
You can see him watering your lawn every single day.
Man, exactly. Just smiling at you, waving, Hey, Tim, But yeah, man, we do not get saved by denomination. We get saved by grace, through faith. And so it's like they literally start looking down on the same people that helped bring them victory. Now we are holier than thou. We're more righteous than you. So now we have to go clear up this problem. So they get these people together. They march on, they get there and they start having a conversation, and the very first thing that comes out of their mouth, Nick, it's not, hey, let's talk just a little bit. Why, what's going on with this altar? Like, they start the conversation by saying, hey, if you think the land that you have is not as holy as the land that we have, then please, by all means, come back to this land, so therefore you won't get caught up in sin. Like, that is an absurd conversation to have with people. Like, I know you built an altar, but it's probably because your land is less holy than my land, so you need to come over here to this side. If you stand in my pulpit, it's more holy than your pulpit, so you'll preach better. Come to my church because it's more holy, so therefore man, you'll feel better whenever you leave. Like, that's the type of conversation that they were having even before identifying the problem or why they felt the way they did. And that's where I feel like, Nick, that we are struggling as churches, as the church. Hey man, I think we do a good job, and I'll pat ourselves on the back. But I think we still have a long way to go in having conversations with people and opening up the door and trying to understand why people think, believe, and feel the way that they do. But that is the basis of getting people to Jesus. You know what I'm saying? And God dropped this on me. He's like, Keenan, you can harp about sin all day long, but if a person's heart is not in the right posture to receive what you're talking about, you may as well just be talking to this couch right now, talking to this refrigerator, because they're not going to receive what you have to say. But if you love them regardless, it might just open up the door to Jesus one day. You know what I'm saying? And that's where we really have to get to, Nick, is having conversations with people. Don't start out with, well, this is what you did wrong. Let's start out with, man, why would you do that for? What was your mindset? Talk about that, man. Talk about the mindset of it.
It's crazy. I think, not even as just Christians in the modern day, I think even as human beings in the modern day, we get so used to telling people what instead of asking people why.
Oh, man. Say that one more time. I felt that. Say that one more time.
I think as, Christians today and as normal human beings on this earth, we get too used to telling people what instead of asking people why.
That hits hard, man.
It's crazy to me. I always say I'm a huge proponent for empathy, and I think that's in the modern world, no matter where you're at, America, Israel, Russia, wherever you're at right now, empathy is just almost non-existent.
Yeah.
I think we have almost a level of fake empathy, like, I'm gonna, a bandwagon empathy, like, I'm gonna be there for everybody, no matter what they believe. There's like, we don't think for ourselves in that matter. But
can I say this really quick before you go? Like whenever you said bandwagon empathy, the first thing that hit my heart or hit my mind was how everybody changes their Facebook pictures, profile pictures, like when a tragedy goes on, like overseas or something. Like, people didn't even know what the Ukraine flag looked like until a war in Ukraine, and now everybody's got a profile picture of a Ukraine flag.
And people are still posting the wrong one. It's like upside down.
So you see what I'm saying? Yeah, I feel that, man. But go ahead.
Yeah, that right there is just a cornerstone of our society these days, is bandwagon empathy. We see it. It's June. Knowing what June means, every single company is going to have a rainbow flag on their profile picture. It's just bandwagon empathy. Like, we support this cause.
Yeah.
And we see that again, throughout so many different places. But what we really need in this world are Christians with empathy.
Yeah.
And I think, again, as Christians, we get so scared of being contaminated by the world that we don't try to understand the world.
Yeah.
And I think that gets us in so much trouble. Because God, I really do believe that Christ himself was the most empathetic person we'll ever see in this world.
Absolutely.
He was able to listen to and understand and have conversations with everyone.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you were a prostitute on the street or a disciple following him or a tax collector or a fisherman.
Yeah.
He was able to sit down and have conversations with you and get to know you and get to show you what love truly looks like.
Right.
But as Christians, again, we're sitting here posting stuff on Facebook, making people mad on a constant basis.
Yeah.
We'll post something on Facebook, just recently about some crazy, thing that's going on in the world, and immediately, what are we doing again? If someone's heart's not ready for it, we're pushing them away.
Right. And I want to say this, I want to interrupt you just really quick, but whenever you said that, whenever we're, we'll use the excuse of, well, the truth is offensive. And it's like, the truth is offensive. Of course the Bible is going to offend sin. Yes, you are correct in that form and in that manner. And yes, the truth might be offensive to people, but can I tell you this? The way that you present it might be offensive to people. The way that you just come off with a 40 grit piece of sandpaper and you smack somebody in the face with it, that might be offensive to them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus knew how to speak out of truth, but he also knew how to speak out of love. You know? Go ahead, man.
Yeah, I mean, when someone's hurting, already, when someone's already down, you don't want to kick them when they're down.
Right.
And I think that's what we're doing right now. So many Christians right now around the world are kicking people while they're down.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people right now are angry and frustrated and sad and scared and fearful. And, as a Christian, we're sitting right there celebrating on top of their graves.
Right.
Like, and I to them, is that going to save people?
Yeah.
Is that going to turn a lost person into a Christian by looking at that?
Right.
But again, we just have such a hard time walking up to somebody and being like, why do you feel this way? Why are you scared? Why are you upset? What's going on? Help me understand it. I want to know what is on your mind right now.
Right.
But again, we get so twisted and get it so backwards. I really do believe that, if we sat down and had conversations with the people we don't agree with, then I really believe that there'd be more Christians in the world.
Oh, man.
And I
True
think
statement.
it's crazy because that's like counterproductive.
Yeah.
We think as a Christian, if I sit there and have conversations and spend time with sinners, then I'm going to become a sinner.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works.
Right.
Jesus sat down with sinners and he is seen as the only perfect man in the entire
Right.
history of the world.
Right.
So it's just crazy that we get it so backwards.
Yeah.
We were basically, again, just going the exact opposite direction that we need to be going. And I think, it really takes a hot button issue like we're struggling with, right now in the modern day that, we look at this and it's, we've had so many conversations about it over the last week.
Right.
About trying, how should I feel? How are these other people feeling right now? We see, Christians on Facebook, Christians in, media just, saying things that make us like feel weird. Like,
Right.
look at it like that just doesn't feel right.
Right.
Like, the way you're acting right now almost hurts the spirit in me.
Right.
And, again, that's where I feel like if you have that true connection with Jesus and, you feel that conviction in your heart that something's not right, that's probably Jesus saying the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, and so they start this conversation with not even, a question, but an accusation, really, and saying, basically they were making the accusation that, hey, you're sinning. You built an altar, now you're sinning. It doesn't look like ours, doesn't feel like ours, doesn't seem like ours. So, hey, you're sinning, man, and you need to come back over to our land because our land's the Holy Land. Where we're at's the Holy Land, and so you're going to be screwing up a lot over here. So you don't need to be doing that. Just come back over. And whenever they began to rebuttal to that response, it starts out with this. It starts out with, hey, like, we built this altar because, we understand and know what God has done. We've seen God do the miracles. The problem comes in the next generations that flow down from us. What if your kids look over at our kids and see that they're not on the same side? And so therefore now there's this discrepancy of who God actually worked for and who he didn't, who he loved more, who he loved less. I love it because the Bible said that the Jordan became a boundary. And we looked at it because God had stopped the flow of the Jordan before. It was a breakthrough. And now they looked at it like the Jordan was a boundary, and it really got me. God spoke to me and he was like, Keenan, don't let your breakthrough become your boundary in helping lost people. Don't let it become a boundary. Now, don't look over on the other side of where you used to be at and go, well, guess we'll just go ahead and not worry about those people. God doesn't love those people. God doesn't want to take care of those people. God doesn't want to bless those people. It's almost like we look at it as a boundary. Listen, oh man, we're gonna just stay away from that situation. Don't go over there. Don't talk to those people. And so they look and they're like, you know what? We're building this altar right now to let people know that God has blessed, worked, and moved in our lives just like he has your lives, and the thing about it is that once we get to the next generation, we want to remind the next generation of how God moved in this generation, And it's like, I think we need to do a better job, Nick. We need to do a better job of bringing in the next generation and not teaching them, not teaching them that, fruition church is the only way to go, or Baptist is the only way to go, or Methodist or Pentecostal is the only way to go. Jesus is the only way to go. The love of Jesus, the grace of Jesus, the forgiveness of Jesus, the compassion of Jesus is the only way to go. And let's treat people like Jesus treated people. Like, my goodness gracious, Jesus was on the cross and he took a thief with him to heaven. Jesus was literally in the midst of being crucified, and yet he calls out and he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We get mad at people for messing up our order at McDonald's. And Jesus is literally yelling to God and saying, forgive them, because they don't understand right now. Forgive them, man. Like, the compassion and the empathy and just how Jesus embodied love in general is something that, Nick, that we can strive for, not as a denomination, not as a religious organization, but, my God, as a Christian. As a Christian today, man. Talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, it all just ties back in together. I mean, if we are supposed to be a Christian, which means Christ-like, we should be emulating Christ, on a daily basis.
Right.
There's so many times, like you said, you'll go to a McDonald's and you'll look at somebody who's mad because, your fries weren't quite as fresh. So you get there and yell at the 16-year-old behind the counter. That wasn't even their fault. They didn't even cook the fries.
Right.
And I mean, I have seen with my own eyes, working at McDonald's, Christians, or people who call themselves Christians, yell at a 16-year-old at McDonald's because their food was made wrong, even though they weren't the ones who made it wrong.
Right.
I have had people yell at me because I have, it's just crazy, but here Jesus is on the cross dying.
Yeah.
And he is saying, forgive them because they don't know what they do.
Yeah.
But yet we're here as a Christian getting on Facebook calling people evil and calling them stupid and calling them evil and insert whatever adjective you want.
Right.
We're sitting there calling people this, calling people that, but we're not sitting there praying for them.
Yeah.
We're not being like, God help them. They just don't quite understand the gravity of the situation. And it's just whatever issue that we may be talking about. But it's crazy again that we are calling ourselves Christians but acting very un-Christ-like.
Right.
On a daily basis. And again, nobody's perfect. Nobody's going to attain that level of perfect, that Jesus had. But it does come with, again, like we've talked about several times, it comes with progress. If you were that person, again, like using myself as a personal example, that person who was very judgmental and very hateful and always was like, I'm telling you what, I'm not asking why. Coming from that person, coming from that background, to the person that I've been able to become, where I'm just able to listen to other people and have difficult conversations and have intelligent conversations with somebody, who I don't even necessarily agree with, but just trying to understand why they believe that way, why they think that way, trying to put myself in their shoes, not to become them, but to understand them.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where we get it so backwards, is we're so afraid of becoming that person. We're so afraid of becoming that sin that we don't even entertain it. And then we don't sit there and we don't talk to them and we don't listen to them and we don't try to help them.
Yeah.
Nobody, I've always, had this stance that, you're going to save a lot more people with an open hand and a hug than you're going to save with a pointed finger telling them they're going to hell.
Absolutely.
And again, so many people get that backwards. They're like, you're going to hell, you're damned, because you believe this, because you support this, because you went to this restaurant, because you did, you're going to hell. And it's just crazy. I know of so many people who have gone to a church before and been burnt because of someone like that.
Yeah.
And again, we are called to love people. We are called to hate sin, not sinners.
Right.
But again, we get it backwards. It's like we personify the sin, like, that person is their sin.
Yeah.
But that's not true. We are not our sin. We're forgiven of our sin through God's grace if we ask for it. They can have the same thing done to them. And we've talked about this several times before. How many Christians are going to be upset one day they get up to heaven and they realize that there are people who murdered people up there.
Yeah.
There are people who raped people up there.
Right.
There are people who lied and cheated and did all kind of whatever horrible thing you can think of.
Right.
People did those things, but then they found out who Jesus was through somebody who was willing to still talk to them.
Right.
How many people, what if somebody had walked up to Ted Bundy and had an actual conversation with him about Jesus Christ?
Yeah,
it's just crazy to think that there could have been one person on this earth that God put there, and because that person said no, that now that person's in hell.
Right.
It's just crazy to think about, because we let our personal convictions and stuff get in the way of I don't want to become that person, so I better not talk to them.
Yeah.
But we send people in a sense to hell because we refuse to be be that person to come into their life and to save them.
Right.
But we just need to be careful. I think really just as a Christian every day walking this earth, talking to people, getting to know people, we need to be careful about our how we portray ourselves to those people and how we portray Christ to those people. You said this several times before, but sometimes we're the only Bible that people read.
Yeah.
And so what are we showing these people in the Old Testament? God's judgment from the Old Testament, where He's going to burn and kill every single person He sees because they're not doing what He wants.
Right.
Or are we going to be emulating Christ like we're supposed to be doing?
Right. Absolutely, man. And and just to go back and reiterate that point that you were talking about, with just the fact of talking to people, it's like, we're not, if you don't talk to somebody, you're not physically sending them, to hell. You know what I'm saying? But at the same point, they're going to make their own decisions, But like we say all the time, Nick, if we don't tell people about Jesus, and who's going to? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Who's going to, man? And honestly, the more people that know about the love of God, the more people that know about the relationship that Jesus wants to have, then I feel like, man, that and my wife embodies this. She loves this quote that heaven's going to be crowded. Make heaven crowded. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's going to be more space in hell, and there's going to be less space in heaven whenever we begin to have a conversation with people and find out what's going on in their life. And this is what happened right here. We're shutting this thing down. We're going to bring it all together. And Nick, you can throw some final thoughts in. But the Israelites go over, they have this conversation, they start out with accusations, they hear the rebuttal to it, and then after they hear the rebuttal, they're like, oh, well, wait a minute. We totally flubbed that situation up. Like, we thought that you were doing this out of sin, but okay. Now we understand why you're doing what you're doing. Like, the whole situation, war, fighting, death, violence, hatred, everything was avoided by having a conversation, by sitting down and understanding why somebody was doing it, out of what position of the heart they were doing it. Because they sat down and had a conversation, they figured out the whole situation, and nothing happened. Everybody was cool. Mm-hmm. Everybody was cool. They went on about their way, man. And so let's bring it all in, Nick, right here. Let's talk about how important having a conversation is with people versus just making judgments or assumptions, man. Take about 30 to 45 seconds if you can, man. Sum it all up for me.
I think really one of the best ways to sum it up is, what you said during service that really hit me. And I know I've seen, because I posted it on Facebook and I've received a lot of reactions to it. But, I was like trying to find the exact quote from it. But, just where it's trying to say that, if people, I think you got this from somebody else even. But
I did.
Yeah, but people can hate. People can hate you because of Jesus, but people shouldn't hate Jesus because of you.
Absolutely.
And we need to be having conversations, not arguments with people. We need to be creating bridges instead of boundaries. This is just something, I've always seen, or not, I wouldn't say always seen, but over the last couple of years, as I've grown in faith and as I've grown with, getting closer to God, I have seen myself as, a person who has more empathy. I've seen myself as that being my spiritual gift, is being able to relate to people, talk to people and understand them and pray for them. And so I've seen myself even before that as a bridge for people.
Yeah.
Where, everybody's always this way or that way, my way or the highway, black or white. I've been able to see myself as that bridge who's able to ask questions around that circle rather than just, this way or that way. I think it's just really important that we see ourselves as a bridge to connect us with other people rather than building those barriers. Don't let your stance on something be a barrier to someone, from hearing it or experiencing God.
Absolutely.
Like your stance on something can turn people away from God. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. You post something on Facebook, you have to think about it first.
Right.
And I think we get in trouble. We're such an impulsive culture. We're such a reactive culture that, when we have something, we see a post and we share it and we don't think about how that one person on our friends list is going to look at it.
Right.
And again, I know, the gospel is supposed to cause offense. It's, that's the way it's supposed to be, but we're not going to win hearts, lives, and souls by offending people.
Right.
Constantly on an everyday basis. We're supposed to offend sin, not people necessarily.
Right. Absolutely.
So I think that's something that we just get again so backwards. We need to make sure that we're being a bridge. We're not being a barrier. We need to make sure we're having conversations, not arguments with people. Just because you talk to someone doesn't mean they have to change your mind doesn't mean you have to change theirs.
Yeah.
You know, your job as a Christian isn't to change people, it's to plant that seed. And again, that's something we get so backwards. You know, we need to make sure that, you know, we're taking a step back, we're thinking before we say something, thinking before we share something, we're posting, you know, whatever we post online shouldn't be, you know, turning people away from God. You know, we should be making sure that, you know, the person that we're exhibiting is Christ-like, Christian. Yep. You know, that's what we're supposed to be. So we just need to be making sure that we're careful. We're not having those conversations, not using our stances as barriers. We need to make sure we're building bridges. We make sure we're connecting with people. We're talking to them, getting to know them, and making sure that people don't have a bad taste in their mouth of who Christ is, just from who we are, what we say, and how we act.
Absolutely, man. So if you can take anything out of this tonight, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow, whenever you might hear this, build bridges. Build bridges. Bridge gaps. Have conversations. Love people. Listen to people. Learn people. And see why people do think and act the way that they do. And then you figure out a more effective way that you can minister the gospel to them. This is Pastor Keenan along with my sidekick Nick. Again, thank you for tuning in so much. Thank you for listening and supporting the Everyday Christian Podcast. And we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And again, we will see you next week. We love you and be blessed.